and welcome to episode 194 of The Dive Down, a Magic the Gathering podcast focused on the latest decks, trends, strategies, and bans for the casual spike.
Oh, that's the best part.
My name is Stanislav here in Chicago, and with me on the line from the BNR capital of the Rocky Mountains, Denver, Colorado, he's still got some Alfredo in his hair. Shane Beeps, welcome home.
Oh, man. I feel like it's been so long. The temporary retirement is over. Yeah, it was nice to have a break, but also listening to the episodes without me, it felt like something was lacking to me personally.
Your ego of hearing yourself talk.
Now, Shane, you were in Italy. Did you have any good Alfredo? Did you have
bottomless breadsticks are amazing in Italy, I heard.
Yeah. Everywhere I was, I felt like it was, I felt like I was family.
Now, and you were under the Tuscan sun, correct?
I don't know where. I wasn't in Tuscany. Where is Tuscany? Is that a region?
Yeah.
Okay. So here's where I was. Long story short, I went to Naples, Positano, some area south of Positano for a couple of days, and then back up into Rome, and was there for a few days. And it was a very nice trip. I enjoyed all of those areas of Italy quite a bit. It was sweet. I got to drive a lot. I drove 400 kilometers. I think that's like 8,000 miles.
Cool.
So that was fun. Yeah. And then I got COVID. So I came back. I tested positive my second to last day in Italy, and I want to tell you all something. It's been like nine days, and I'm barely feeling better. This stuff it's legit. It's very real. You do not want to get this. I try to be good. I was wearing masks in like museums and stuff like that, public anything that's crowded indoors. But then you get lazy, and you're like, well, I'm eating indoors. Can't wear a mask on doing that. Or, just get a little lazy, get a little complacent, and then you end up getting the COVID. I even had the new bivalent booster, and this thing kicked my butt. You heard me whining in the admin chat for the last week. It's not been fun.
Shane would not shut up about it. I have COVID.
I got the COVID.
This Italian food doesn't taste like anything.
Oh man, the best thing was I did keep my sense of taste.
Well, no, we can't let that slide because 3 days before you tested positive, you were complaining about some of the underseasoned food, and Stan goes, "Do you have COVID?"
Yeah, it's a good point.
And
I was like, I don't think so.
Afterwards, after this happened, Stan and I were talking, and he was like, "I think I was right." He's like, "I think I was right."
I mean, I did have some good food. I think just my seasoning sensibilities are different. But overall, Italy good, COVID bad, and I'm not gonna tell you all what to do out there. But I would encourage you to remember it's still out there, and you don't really want to get it. It's not good for you or fun.
I'm gonna go get boosted. I'm just gonna say that I haven't been putting it off. My wife has gotten boosted. I'm gonna go get boosted. I'm gonna make an effort to get boosted now. Even more so because of what you've told me the last couple of days. So
I got boosted. In fact, I had an appointment to get my kid his final boost dose that all the kids were entitled to. And the day before that appointment, the pediatrician called me and was like, "Hey, we got adult boosties too. If you want a booster for yourself while you get your kids boosty." And I was like, "Boost me up, doc. How about that?"
Do it.
I'd like to introduce our other co-host.
Oh yeah, him.
The Godfather Dave Harwager is also here.
It's fine. It's not about me this week.
No, it's definitely not.
I mean, it kind of is. We're playing a deck that's very up your alley, Dave.
It is. Yeah, true.
But before we talk about that deck, this is an exciting show because we're going to react to Monday's a very exciting banned and restricted announcement in Standard. And I don't know if any other formats were hit. We're probably just going to ignore those. Really talking about Standard today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, why not?
Well-known experts on Standard that we are.
We certainly are. Mostly F2P Standard on Arena, mobile.
I just play mono red every season, no matter what, on the FTP.
Best of one only.
Hell yeah.
Does anything get banned in best of three? Because I don't play that.
And then after that satirical bit, we're going to dive into Red-Black Scam in Modern, one of the hottest decks to make itself known in our favorite format over the last few months. It's been on our radar for a while, but we had to wait for Shane's return from vacation because he would have been really mad if we dove into it without him.
Yeah, creativity fine, this not as fine.
Right. We knew you'd be fine not doing I'm going to cast X equals Indomitable Creativity, X equals 1. Oh, it got countered?
This deck can't beat counter spells.
That's what the whole reaction would have been.
Zach Ryle in my place was honestly much better. He's so natural at this. I love listening to Zach on the pod.
He's fine.
Yeah. Just once I would have loved for Shane to chime in, like, why are we playing 1/1 dwarves? They don't do anything. This 0/3 crab can't attack.
I guess it's better than it's a strict upgrade to the crab tokens, but still not sure.
All right, before all that though, let's housekeep. We've got some new patrons to join the Dive Down Nation. We've got Terrence P, Kyle M returns, Thomas R here for the first time, along with David S, Walter A, and another returning patron, Jack J.
Wow.
Welcome.
6 is pretty good.
Yeah.
Amazing.
That's a good week.
And the boomerangs, you gotta love the boomerang patrons.
Well, welcome back home, everybody. Welcome home and welcome back home, everybody. When you're here, your family, pass the breadsticks.
Hospitaliano. That's what I felt
We
everywhere.
call it Hospitaliano.
If you'd like to support the show, you can find us over on Patreon, patreon.com/thedivedown. Now that Shane is back, as soon as he is feeling a little bit better, we're going to get caught up on our international patron shipments. We got boxes going out to some folks as well as some playmats.
Yeah, we've got the full load for a lot of people. We got the full complement of Patreon swag going out. And we appreciate all y'all being patrons. And other ways you can show your support for us, throw us some reviews over on Apple Podcasts, throw us some stars on Spotify. You can use Mana Traders, which is an awesome way to play Magic the Gathering online. It's the way that we play, I think, all of our Magic the Gathering online, unless Stan has been like, I need to purchase some shocks and fetches to play my 2,000 ticket decks that I can't afford with Mana Traders. Have you done that, Stan? Stan looks guilty. But if you use code TheDiveDown15, you get 10% off your first 2 months of service over at Mana Traders. You can also, of course, purchase Magic the Gathering paper cards at Nerd Rage Gaming. Use the code DIVE8 for 8% off your order there. Because as you know, we are big fans of Nerd Rage. We're the official podcast of their series. The Newark, Ohio series is coming up on the 22nd. That's pretty soon. So if you're going to think about going to that, get yourself registered. It's at the Cherry Valley Hotel and Event Center of Newark, Ohio. Dave, do you know where this is? Because I don't.
So Newark, Ohio is about 30 miles east of Columbus. So it's really Columbus, Ohio, but just outside of that. Cherry Valley sounds lovely this time of year. I haven't been there in a minute, but yes, it's outside of Columbus. So if you're looking for a high level tournament, head out there. What's the format again, Shane?
It is a $10,000 trial. It's a team constructed of Pioneer, Modern, Legacy. Team's always the best. And then the following day is a $5,000 Modern trial. So get yourself registered for that. It's limited to 100 teams. So, and they already have 16. So, and that's a couple weeks early. So you know what to do, Ohioans and Ohio adjacent folks.
All right, with all that out of the way, let's do a breakdown. We haven't done one of those in a while, but there's a really exciting announcement this week in the wide world of research and development. Our friend Ian Duke is back writing. It's a passion. 2 cards banned and constructed. Standard Meat Hook Massacre is banned.
The Meat Hook Massacre.
Yeah. The Ohio State Meat Hook Massacre was banned.
That was my nickname in college.
Mm-hmm.
More importantly, in Modern, Yorion Sky Nomad banned once and for all.
Slow clap.
Yes!
Slow clap.
Yes!
But man, doesn't it feel, I mean, we can talk about this later. Let's talk about the rationale first. Why don't we?
Let's just talk about how excited we are that it's banned first. We're excited about this, right?
Yeah.
Honestly, sorry people who love this deck, but I'm excited about this.
It's like, I almost feel like it's like I would have been excited a few months ago. Now I just feel like it's sort of, yeah, cool. You finally did it.
Yeah, it feels obvious. I'm like happy but not excited because I'm just kind of like we should have been here, as Shane put it a few months ago.
Yeah, I mean,
you guys are rough. You don't get excited when things go right, even if it's late.
Well, you know what it truly is I got excited that it wasn't a card that I feel more emotionally attached to.
Sure.
Yes.
Me too.
And also, it makes me happy that I don't have to even consider doing like a Your Rhinos thing any longer. Just the only answer is now between Teamer and 5-color. I don't have to worry about Yorion options at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Let's talk about this.
Sure.
Okay, there's a big multi-paragraph announcement. We probably can't read all that, right? We should probably just summarize this.
We can try.
Yorion,
We're notoriously good at summarizing things succinctly.
Yorion most commonly appears as a companion in 4-color Omnath decks, which show a strong win rate and, according to our matchup data, are likely to continue to rise in popularity. Likely to continue to rise in popularity is a very weird statement right now.
Footnote needed.
Yeah, exactly. The Wikipedia editors have flagged this section for being uncited. In addition to game balance concerns with the deck, we're also factoring physical dexterity requirements of playing with a large deck for tabletop. I guess I can't bring my giant avatar decks anymore with me. You know those big old Magic cards? Have you seen those? There's a giant Black Lotus and a giant Chaos Orb. Large deck for tabletop. I mean, hey, I'm here with them for all these things. This is all fine, right? Okay, it takes too long to shuffle this card all the time. It leads to repetitive game states. We've seen people talk about that. At this point, there really is only a couple of decks that were playing Yorion, the big the big 4-color control / midrange decks, and your Rhinos, and poor Taxes players somewhere crying to themselves about how one of the cards that they got to be good with was also taken away from them.
And then they just lean into the physical dexterity stuff in another paragraph. And look, if you have physical dexterity issues or it has caused you not to play this card in paper, I get it. And I appreciate that, but it's so interesting that they're really focusing on the paper play aspects, where it's modern requires shuffling and physical manipulation of cards, and if it encourages large decks like Yorion does, and they've existed in the past, but only on the fringes of play. So it's just we get it. I mean, what about the power of it? Yeah,
I mean, I almost feel like that repetitive shuffling isn't actually a Yorion problem.
No, it's a modern problem.
We played Creativity last week, and whenever you have turn 2 Ren and 6, you're shuffling every turn. I don't think Yorion creates that issue specifically. I think that's a modern fetch land format plus a card like Ren and 6 that lets you play a fetch land every turn. Which is not to say that I'd rather they banned Ren and 6, but there's certain omitted details, in my opinion, here that I think feels like they're almost unwilling to come out with some of the actual reasoning behind banning this card, which is that companions are very problematic, and Yorion was one of the most egregious ones.
Yeah. Ding. Ding, ding, ding. It is wild to me. The word companion does not appear in this paragraph anywhere other than just saying the card appears as a companion in 4-color Omnath decks. That's the only place it says it. It doesn't say anything about the fact that companion is cracked in half and we're sorry, because that's what this should say.
I'm going to be conspiratorial for a second.
Are you going to tell me you think there's more companions coming?
No.
Okay.
Although that would be awesome if there were more companions coming. Here's my conspiracy theory. I think there's probably an internal memo at Wizards of the Coast that they can't publicly admit that companions are a mistake until one day Morrow lets it slip on his blog.
I mean, quite possibly.
He's been for you might remember that there's been whole threads on Twitter with Morrow talking to people saying where he was basically look, I'm the person who made companion go into Ikoria. Did I make a mistake by trying to do something that I thought was new and interesting?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a discussion. I think that he kind of knows that they overshot the power level on these, but anyway, companions suck. I'm glad they got rid of the best 2 now. 2 down, 8 to go.
Let's just get to the meat here, right? When they just say, therefore, to make modern as fun, we've seen this rationale before, and accessible, we see that much less frequently, I'd say, as it can be for all types of players. Yorion Sky Nomad is banned in modern. How do we react to this? What are our actual takes besides the ones we've been giving throughout this entire first few minutes?
Joy.
Relief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Stan, you go first. Why relief? I mean, you hinted at it before. Is it because you thought something you cared about more was going to be banned?
Yeah, I was worried that expressive iteration and frankly, these cards I think probably are still on a watch list somewhere, but like expressive iteration, Renin 6, and Omnath, I think if any of those cards had been banned, no one would have been super surprised. Like people may have been disappointed, but I think like those are all cards that were in contention.
Yeah, I will say you kind of just snuck expressive iteration into that set with Renin 6 and Omnath. I think people for a long time have been clamoring for Renin 6 and Omnath to be banned, and I do think that they've been on sort of the proverbial watch list for a long time. Expressive iteration, people start finally kind of starting to talk about that as maybe being something that is strong enough to ban in Modern the same way that was banned in Pioneer, I think is a little new. This was the first ban cycle or the first time that we knew that there was a ban coming up that I felt like a number of people on Twitter were suddenly like, oh gosh, I hope they don't ban EI.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that's because they already banned it in Pioneer.
Mm-hmm.
But I agree with you that I feel like it's starting to get a bit of a target on its back as well.
Yeah.
Shane?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of said my piece about, like, I think the rationale is weird. Like, like they give a lot of stats in other parts of this announcement, not the Modern one. They're kind of like, these decks have 53% win rates and so on. We think things are healthy. And all they say about this is like 4-color Omnath decks have a, quote, strong win rate.
Yeah.
Like they don't give actual stats like they do for other aspects of the overall announcement. And it's just like so weird to me that they waited until now to do the ban. Like Yorion was much more popular, like, and powerful, I think, in the previous months before people actually, I think, moved to attack it more aggressively.
Before Leyline Binding too. Leyline Binding has something to do with Yorion kind of going down, I think, a little bit as well. And also creativity getting better has to do with that as well.
It's just so odd that like they just in like the statement, like these 4-color Yorion decks are likely to continue to rise in popularity when like we've been seeing their decreasing popularity recently. Like it feels like a very sort of like lagging announcement where like they aren't paying active attention to Modern in the same way that I feel like they have in some previous announcements.
Maybe. I have been running into it a lot in leagues, to be honest.
4-color?
Yeah, like basically every league I run into it at least once, and sometimes more often than that. And hey, can I just say a little credit where it's due? I really like this, what I would call a light touch approach. Just like get this one card that a lot of people, including the three of us, have been pretty frustrated by for the last like 6 months or more, and just like kind of see what happens when, I mean, I think in general we would agree that the format's like not bad.
I like it.
We all relatively enjoy Modern play, and like just taking out Omnath, I don't think it like kills 4-color value decks.
You mean Yorion? You just said Omnath.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't think. Well, but that's the thing. Like, I don't think it like ruins Omnath, Renin 6, Elemental piles. I think there's probably still a way to configure them.
I agree.
And it'll be nice to kind of see the direction of the format without Yorion sort of being this defining factor. Or even like this pillar of the format that doesn't necessarily contribute to the format in a diverse or interesting way, but rather just kind of like goes into 1.8 decks.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that they were forthcoming in the like second to last paragraph of this. They talk a lot about the manual dexterity thing, which like Shane said, it's great. I think if that's a problem that people have, and that I think that's great that they considered that, but the gameplay issue with it, with finally we've also heard from many players that the repeated triggers caused by Yorion and many of the cards surrounding it can lead to repetitive gameplay patterns and long games with lots of downtime between the other players' actions. That's the main thing to me that they said here, without just saying, oh yeah, and by the way, you always have Yorion in your hand because you can always go and get it thanks to Companion, which is sort of the second half of this thought. It's not just that what Yorion does is repetitive. It's that you always have it. It's that it's repetitive.
I mean, that's just the wild thing too. Is like they just refuse to rip off this Band-Aid. And I mean, again, I don't think like, Lutri and stuff like that is something that should be banned out of the format necessarily. But like, I mean, I think I just saw some video Spike posted the other day that was like calling Gigantha like a broken card. Do you know what I mean? It's just like these cards are still good. You still get free Giganthas. You still get free Kahiras.
I don't think any of those will ever get banned, though, barring like them just killing the mechanic. Because even though Gigantha and Kahira are free, they don't have the same type of value impact on the decks the way Lurrus and Yorion do.
They're way more powerful. I mean, I agree with that.
Yes.
We'll see. I'm not quite willing to say they'll never get banned. I think that it might take a long time, or it might take something really weird happening.
Yes. Barring like them being truly broken for any other reason than like you get to start with an extra card.
Just new cards coming in hand, new cards making elementals better, something making Obosh absurd, like who knows, but
we still have Pioneer to talk about. So what do you think the impact of this is going to be? Like, do you think there's like new best decks, or like what has an up arrow, what has a down arrow? Any thoughts there?
I think a lot of things have up arrows. Weirdly.
Yeah. What do you think the most?
It's hard for me to pinpoint any one thing, because I almost feel like the 4-color piles are just sort of this fun police where a lot of decks have a poor 4-color matchup, and with the exception of like maybe Burn or Hammer, fewer decks have really good, easy 4-color matchups.
I think this is like a boon to personally Living End. I think that had not a great 4-color matchup, and I think that it has a good creativity matchup. And so I think that's one reason that I think I've been seeing a little bit more of it.
Wait, Living End has a good creativity matchup?
Mm-hmm. This is what I keep hearing.
I believe it. I believe Living End is a great answer to Archon.
Yeah, I mean,
unless you have Archons in the graveyard when they cast Living Ends.
Well, I mean that you have to play. You have to play in a special way. You have to play in a way to like make that happen. Versus like Living End just has to do what it's going to do.
I mean, you have Fable. I'm just saying. All right. Anyway.
Yeah, but if you're playing Fable on 3, that means you're putting Archon in your graveyard on 4, which is
too late.
Yeah, by then like they've cycled 3 cards and possibly like set up a violent outburst.
Yeah. Anyway, I mean, and like I think Yogg is something that, I think doesn't love playing against 4-color control. That should see an improvement. Although Yogg's one of those decks where people don't sort of pivot to it like they might Living End. Murktide, of course, had a poor 4-color matchup, and so this removes like one of that deck's biggest enemies. But maybe it'll get to 50% win rate now.
I just don't think that we can say like you're talking a little bit like this deck is not going to exist anymore, and I think that this deck is still going to exist in some form. There will still be a 4-color money pile red and 6 control deck. I don't know what's going to be in it. It might be elementals instead. It might be still EI and stuff. I know that there's a lot of people who are like, well, this mana base is never going to work with only 60 cards in the deck. And I'm like, I don't know. Like people are not going to have not been fixing mana bases by playing decks with more than 60 cards in them ever. So I do think that this deck before Yorion existed, there was close to this deck. It just had Uro and, Icefang Coatl and stuff like that
this
back
is
in the
fair.
day. So I think that we shouldn't pretend like this deck is going to be gone. It's just losing one of its most consistent tools that it had available to do lots and lots of different things. But the cards in this deck are still very good.
Yeah, and I'll even add to that. I think we might continue to see multiple iterations of 4-color that just aren't Yorion piles. Like we could still have a Elementals version with Risen Reef, or we can have a more controlling version with things like Teferi, Ephemerate, Ewit, etc.
You might see combo versions. I mean, I saw Andrea Mungucci on his flight back home to Italy from America, since we just exchanged Shane for him.
High-fiving Shane in the air.
Yeah, exactly. Posted a list of 60-card, 4-color Vivian on the Hunt combo, which I don't know if you remember that was a combo that started to emerge in 4-color at one point in time where they wanted, a creature combo out. Like, that's something that people are going to be experimenting with too. They were already experimenting with these things in different metas. It's just they took like the 5% of consistency off the top of this deck by getting rid of Yorion, and let's see what happens from here.
Yeah.
But are you all so ready for people to just constantly talk about banning Ren and 6 now? Because it's coming. I'm surprised that our Discord was not just filled with people angry about Ren and 6 not getting banned. There was sort of this is a good ban kind of vibe in the chat, and people trying to figure out what would happen next. But that discourse is going to continue real soon after this, I think, depending on what happens.
Yeah, but if it weren't Ren and 6, it would be something else. That's
you're
perpetual
right.
modern discourse, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. It's what keeps us in business. You know what I'm saying?
Heck
Join our
yeah.
Patreon at patreon.com/thedivedown if you want to hear more band speculation every, 6 weeks or so. Are you in the camp of, not to open up a whole other can of worms, a lot of people seem to think that cards were going to get unbanned in this cycle too. I kind of don't feel like that's coming for a while with anything around, but maybe, I guess.
Why unban cards when you can just print Modern Horizons 3?
Correct. Great
Yes.
take, Shane. I agree with that. Why unban Splinter Twin when you can just print Splinter Twan?
Twins.
Yeah.
Splinter Twang. It just wears a
Yes.
little cowboy hat.
I heard that was an Unfinity.
All right. Do you want to talk about Pioneer real briefly? How they didn't ban anything?
Yeah, I think we can talk about it for a minute. Shane, why don't you give us the high
All right.
level of the paragraph here that they had for
All right.
Pioneer?
Well, so Pioneer looks to be in, quote, a good place as we head into the regional championship qualifier season in November and December. Wide variety of strategies, blah, blah, blah. The most played deck is Rakdos Midrange on Magic Online with a 13% metagame share. Note that that's much less than what Goldfish states. So that does indicate that Goldfish's metrics, a little bit different than the actual metrics. None of the top 20 most played decks, interesting cutoff, have a non-mirror match win rate of more than about 53%. And this is funny. In general, we've heard a lot of positivity from players about the state of the format. So long story short, they think everything's fine because decks have no non-mirror win rates of about 53%. Even decks that have 13% meta shares. Yeah, so I don't know. What can I say to that? Like it's kind of a weird numbers they're using here. Top 20 decks.
Is it that weird? Top 20 is not that weird. I almost
That's a
feel
lot
like
of
they're.
decks.
I almost feel well. That's what I'm saying. Is I almost feel like they're making a point to say, look, we looked at 20 decks that we see on Magic Online, and none of them have a non-mirror that's even at 55%. That's pretty big sample.
Well, here's what I'm thinking. Like, let's say Rakdos has like a bunch of like sort of obscure-ish, like 0.1 sub 1%, like Niv to Light, Mono Black Aggro, things like that, right? Like, is that what is bringing the Rakdos midrange win percentage down to 53%? And like, if you looked at the top 10, it would be like 56%. Like, I don't know the answer to that, right?
No, that's not what they're saying here, though. None of the top 20 most played decks have a non-mirror match. They're just saying that if they take out the mirror matches, no matter what they play, none of them are above 53%.
Yeah,
They're not.
Yeah, that seems good then. That's really good. I mean, that's really impressive. That's really hard to do to a metagame. Like, that usually is something that comes from like active nerfing and buffing, like in Runeterra, where like they're constantly hammering like the 57% deck down to like 53. You know what I mean?
I mean, that on its face makes it sound like Pioneer is a balanced format, if that's true. I know that people on this podcast don't love the feel of it. Stan, you have things to say.
Well, does our experience match the description provided in Duke's article?
I mean, their description is merely that decks have okay win rates. It's not really anything about
Nobody
fun.
has a broken win rate.
No one has a broken win rate, and then it says they're not really saying anything about repetitive play experiences, mono green, anything like it's weird how they basically say no one's complaining apparently, and so we're not going to do anything.
It's very clinical. I don't love it. I guess I just have to agree to disagree. I think having Karn combo in mono green is not okay, but if people are beating it through some strategies, that's probably just indicative that I don't play enough Pioneer to explore those solutions to what I consider a problem.
What's weird to me though is that people are playing the decks, like the top decks of the format have a huge metagame share, but they're not that much better than other decks. So we're hearing from WOTC, and so it's just usually we see metagames naturally adjust to be like, okay, well, let's find the 57% deck, but maybe it doesn't exist because of just Pioneer's power level flatness or what. But it's wild that like 13-ish% are still sticking with a deck that has, a slightly higher than 50% win rate.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for what it's worth, when I play Pioneer, which is like once a month, I still have fun playing Pioneer. And I'm going to start playing more Pioneer as we get ready to go to Atlanta because all the events are Pioneer. I don't even know if any of the last chance qualifiers are modern or whatever. Like, I'm just going to try to be a little more up on it as we go over the next 6 weeks or so. And I'm moderately excited by that. Like, that's fine. Another place to play Rakdos Midrange in, I guess. But I still have fun doing it. I fully agree with you, Stan, though, that like after playing Mono Green a couple weeks ago when you and I talked about it, my feelings about even piloting that deck is like, I don't want to play it, and I don't think it's good that it has a combo in it. I think it's absurd, too. So I do kind of wish they would have acted to make that more fun. So bottom line, Pioneer, no changes, kind of surprised, but also they have this big tournament coming up that's like worldwide, so I get it.
But wouldn't it have been so exciting? Wouldn't it have been awesome if they just took the combo out of Mono Green? Like Nykthos, I think, actually may have been a bridge too far, but like just ban Karn or Cauldron or some crap and just like see what happens. I think that would have made the RC even more exciting.
Yeah, I mean, they did used to do that before Pro Tours. I mean, most infamously, they banned Splinter Twin about 3 weeks or something before Pro Tour Oath of the Gatewatch. And that was exciting.
And then wasn't that the Pro Tour that Eldrazi took like 6 of the top 8?
Oh yeah, it was absurd. Anyway, I will say, yeah, so Mono Green hit it. I did think it was interesting how many people were calling for something to be straight up banned out of Rakdos, which it just shows how much people don't like being thought seized, I think. Because it's like, okay, fine. Look at this. Rakdos isn't even that good. Like, none of the decks are that good by themselves, apparently, according to Wizards.
I can agree with that none of the decks in Pioneer are that good.
Man, it's true, though.
All right. This was fun. Let's take a quick break. And when we return, we're going to dive into Red Black Scam in Modern. That's right. It's Scammin time. Stay with us. It's October. It's spooky. There's skeletons and jack-o'-lanterns climbing up the walls of my neighbors' houses, but they're not real. I don't think they can hurt me. My
neighbors busted out like they're 10-foot ones. Oh man, they have 3 of them now. And the horse. I love it. Speaking of a topic for this ad break.
Yeah, we got not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 horses. Barrister and Man introducing the 4 Horsemen collection.
It's out. It's out, baby. Order it.
Famine, plague, death. I've never seen Barrister Man do anything quite like this. It's not just fragrances anymore. They've got a 4 Horsemen hat, t-shirt, decals. You can even buy entire sets of all 4 fragrances if you want all the soaps, all the splashes, all the balms. Get the entire line in one sweet package.
I like that on the webpage. It's like the 4 Horsemen, the t-shirt, the 4 Horsemen, the hat. It's like Spaceballs, the movie. Spaceballs, the t-shirt. Spaceballs, the Rubik's Cube.
Dive down the hat. Dive down the t-shirt. Dive down the...
Yeah, you should order all those things too.
You know what else? It's time to start thinking about holiday shopping.
It is time. You're right.
You don't want it to be December 20th. You're a couple days into Hanukkah. Christmas is right around the corner, and you're like, oh, golly, I don't have gifts yet for my in-laws.
Yeah, what kind of garbage can I get on Amazon Prime that they will know came from Amazon Prime?
Right. Don't do that. Instead, check out these collections over at Barrister and Man. And when you do, if you use promo code TheDiveDown15, you'll get 15% off your first order from Barrister and Man on any of the 4 Horsemen or other amazing products, fragrances, or collections that they offer.
Yeah, we've been pointing this out, but if you just want to try them all, while they're still in there, you're like, well, I don't know which one I'm going to like the most. You get the $5.99 shaving soap sampler of each of them, and then you get to try them all, and then you get to pick the one you like the most, and then you get to go, and then everything's great. So I'm looking forward to getting those samples from Will over at Barrister and Man, because I want to smell like war and famine. Maybe I'll mix them.
Gentlemen.
Yeah?
It's Scammin time.
Oh, perfect.
I keep saying that because I've been watching random clips of Power Ranger reruns and highlights.
Really?
I'm not joking, yeah.
I thought you were like a big Morbin guy.
I don't know. My TikTok algorithm noticed that I watched one, so now it's just only sending me more.
It's irrevocably broken.
Yeah.
The Instagram algorithm, if you watch one thing, that's all you get. You just get so much of that same person or that same topic. It's just like, look, I watched it once. I'm not like the newest, biggest fan.
I'm not married to the reaction chef.
Just stay off Instagram. I don't use Instagram.
Well, you're on Twitter, David.
Oh, God.
You got different algorithms on you.
I have a different problem. It's true.
But Stan, I'm really happy to be back for this. One of these hot new decks of Modern, quote unquote.
Yeah, you've been talking about trying this deck for a while, so I'm going to be very excited to hear whether or not your expectations matched your experience.
Sure.
We'll find out. But this week, we're back on one of the relatively newer decks in the format. It's another deck dive, 2 weeks in a row.
Whoa.
Talking about Rakdos Midrange.
Yes. Can we please call this Rakdos Midrange, or as Zach suggested last week, Rakdos Elementals, which I actually think is a much better name than Rakdos Scam. Kind of hate Scam. Can we not that?
It's not an Elementals deck. I mean, it's just Rakdos Midrange, but it's good Rakdos Midrange.
Yes, I agree with that. It's just Rakdos Midrange. And here's how much it's just Rakdos Midrange.
Yes.
You might remember right after Modern Horizons 2 came out, Everett, Aspiring Spike, friend of the show, one of the first 5-0s that he posted was with Luris-powered Rakdos Midrange, thanks to cards like Ragavan, Dalthy Voidwalker, Kroxa, Turok, Lightning Bolt, Thoughtseize. Do you remember these cards being in a deck that was vaguely popular for a minute there right after Modern Horizons 2 came out?
Yeah, like when Luris was still around.
Right. This deck...
It had a name, right? Wasn't that Rakdos Rock?
Some people call it Rakdos Rock. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was also Rakdos Midrange, though, in my opinion. And really, I think that what this is, and Blood Moon, of course, the Blood Moon in that deck, there's Blood Moon in this deck. I think that really what kind of happened.
Put Blood Moon into a Luris deck.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you're right. Of course it did. My bad. Forgot about Luris already.
It had Liliana of the Veil instead, Dave. Oh, wait.
Also, because of Luris. This one has Liliana of the Veil sometimes. Ugh. Look, here's the thing. These cards are okay, right? Like, they're good. Ragavan's the best creature in the format. Dalthy Voidwalker is fine and randomly hoses some decks here or there. Thoughtseize, Bolt, Kolaghan's Command, Terminate. They're cards that all have their place right now in different decks with more complicated mana bases than this deck has. Blood Moon goes in different decks. They make an okay deck. Yes. And with Luris, this was a shell that was pretty powerful because you could recycle cards. Sometimes you played Bauble to be able to draw extra things, or you always played Bauble to be able to draw extra things. So after Luris was banned, this shell kind of lost its way for a little bit. And I think that what we're looking at is just Rakdos Midrange that figured out something powerful enough to do that keeps up with the rest of the format.
Dave, what is that powerful thing to do?
And here it is. That powerful thing to do is to scam people.
With elementals.
With elementals and draft chaff. So what you do is you do the thing that people were afraid of when Grief was first spoiled, when Modern Horizons 2 was coming out, which is basically you cast Grief, you pitch a card from your hand to evoke Grief, and then you cast a spell that keeps it from going to the graveyard, or in this case, sort of takes advantage of it going to the graveyard to get an additional trigger and get a persistent turn 1 mana, 4/3 that just made your opponent discard 2 cards. It's basically like casting a Turok on them with Kicker.
4/3 with Menace, no less. Hard to block.
With Menace. Yeah. And you do the same thing with this, or you do it with Fury. And both of them are somewhat formidable threats. They do different things. Fury, of course, is a more powerful threat on its face. But that's the powerful thing that's been grafted onto this deck to make this shell of cards be able to keep up with the other powerful things that are going on in Modern, like Violent Outburst into 2 4/4s on turn 3. Like, that's what this deck does. And it has 7 slots dedicated to cards like Undying Malice that bring a creature that went to the graveyard back this turn back to the battlefield. That's all it is.
Now, Dave, you mentioned something that I've completely forgot about, which was after Grief was spoiled, people were really nervous about Grief plus Ephemerate.
Right.
And this is that deck, but you're just not playing Ephemerate. You're playing like Feign Death and Undying Malice, which our cards will define in a bit. I don't know if you ever felt like you would rather have had an Ephemerate, but I almost wonder if this deck is built to exploit that synergy because it is so good without having to play underpowered white spells.
I think that's 100% what this deck is trying to do. And playing better red spells like Ragavan, Blood Moon.
Terminate.
Yeah. So before we go further, Shane put together a nice kind of history of where this deck came from. We're talking about the proto deck before people really tried this other stuff, but where's the story of this iteration of Rakdos Midrange?
What's funny is, I think most people started noticing, Rakdos Scam, Rakdos Midrange, Rakdos Elementals, whatever you want to call it, is like when former pro Pascal Maynard started doing well with it, like in March of this year. I remember like on the 19th of March, he took it to like this Modern 5K and then a Team Trio event, and he did really well with it. He tweeted about it. And I remember after that, I think he took it to some top 32s of challenges and things like that. So we were like, what is this weird deck that Pascal Maynard is playing? Is that actually Pascal Maynard, or is someone using Pascal Maynard's name on Magic Online? And then, so I kind of assumed that's when it kind of was getting going.
Yeah, a bunch of people in the chat being like, this can't be a good deck with Feign Death.
Yes.
In it.
Like what a weird meme. He must have just been playing out of his mind. But after doing more digital archaeology, I found like echoes of this deck going all the way back to late November of 2021. So Professor French, who now goes by PT Bench on Twitter, effectively made the same deck or played the same deck to a 5-0, and it's almost the same. It's impressively similar. There's a lot of 2-ofs, which is like kind of the beginning of a lot of decks. It's like, well, I'll just play 2 of a lot of different things to see what works here, like Village Rites or KCOM, Inquisition of Kozilek, Spikefield Hazard, stuff like that. And but largely the conceptual fundamentals of this deck, the creature suite, everything were in place. And then it took a little bit of time, but by March, Pascal was making this deck more well known. The snowball was rolling. And then over the last 3 months, especially, Goldfish has Rakdos Midrange at like 4% of the meta of the last 3 months. And then the last month, it's 6% of the meta, which is more evidence of its growing popularity. So really, we've seen a deck go from kind of meme curiosity to a modern staple over the past 10 months or so without any real significant additions to the card pool, because there's not a lot of like really new set cards that this deck is running.
Sounds weirdly like the deck we talked about last week, right? Indomitable Creativity, where lots of people had different types of results with it. It kind of was under the radar until the last couple of months suddenly comes to the foreground.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's a cool deck. I'm glad we get to suddenly, finally play it rather. And, I think in our notes, I want to personally give a hat tip out to a player called Sprouts. Like when I was doing my digital archaeology, I saw the name Sprouts quite a bit. And also happened to be the primer that we read on mysticalteachings.com. It really helped us kind of learn a lot about the deck and understand some of the, eccentricities and whatnot.
Digital Archaeologist was Shane's stage name when he toured with Animal Collective.
It's just me on an IBM ThinkPad.
One time when I was in high school, I did what I thought was like an electronic music performance as part of a class project. And at the end of the class project, we just boiled ramen noodles in a microwave for some reason as like the last note of the thing.
That's
I still don't know why
Dave.
we did that. It was very, very, very performance arty.
So yeah, I'm going to just completely ignore that and move on. So, Rakdos Undying, Rakdos Blink. I'm just going to use 8 different names for this deck. It's really like Dave was getting at. It's just a mid-range deck, and it has, like mid-range decks do, both proactive and reactive game plans and cards that support those game plans. So, like, whether your proactive game plan is evoking Grief or Fury, and then, Feign Deathing it, or it's you get your reactive cards, like, Bolts and Fatal Push or Terminate. It's like you have a proactive game plan, you have a reactive game plan, you get to play some cool cards, you get to use some removal spells. A lot of stuff going on here.
So should we hop into what actually makes this deck tick?
Let's do it, Mr. Wick. Let's start with the Elementals.
The most interesting cards in the deck, for sure.
The backbone,
right?
for
By
sure.
far. The coolest cards in the deck. I mean, the freest cards in the deck.
Yeah, this is the power of the deck. So the 2 elementals in this deck, you're not surprised by this, of course, but they are Grief and Fury. And, they're awesome cards on their own. They let you do all kinds of different things. Lots of different decks run them for different reasons. And the thing here is, as we said earlier, you either try to make a 4/4 double striker that kills a bunch of their creatures or just dodges their removal, or you try to grief them and end up with a 4/3 menace and take the 2 best cards in their hand on turn 1. That's the deal.
Yeah. I mean, this is finally a good grief deck, right? Because, I think everyone's been waiting for a good enough grief deck, and I think this is the only one that's actually working, I think, for a few reasons, right? And it's that it has enough black cards. But we know that black is not the best color in Modern, really, and this is the deck that comes closest enough to having enough of them to reliably both evoke grief and then use those same crappy cards to keep grief on the battlefield and trigger it again.
Yeah. I mean, this is certainly the deck that is built the most around grief as a card right now, right? There are a lot of decks that try to use it as a piece. Sometimes it ends up in living end because it's pretty powerful there. And so that can be used it's not always there, but it's off there quite often. But this deck is all about wanting to be able to Ham to Turok your opponent on turn 1 and just take their cards. And, one thing that's interesting is that I think people feel like the 4/4 double striker play on turn 1 is the real headline here. But I actually, as I played the deck more and more and I read through Sprouts' primer about the deck, that's when I realized that really what you want to be doing is trying to mess with your opponent's hand above everything else.
And that's because a turn 1 grief is more impactful. At that point, you're really trading for cards in a way that turn 1 Fury, especially if you're on the play, it just doesn't. A turn 1 Fury, you're resigning a card disadvantage for the sake of, here's a threat that's actually really hard to kill early in the game.
Yeah, I mean, grief is just strictly card advantage. You spent 2 cards for 2 cards of your choosing in their hand, and you got a creature on the board. So, win-win.
It's like the evilest Muldrifter ever.
Yeah. And I guess it's a good question, Dave. Is I found myself in some of my matchups, specifically control matchups, where I didn't think they would have particularly good removal against something like a turn 1 Fury. I found myself spewing a turn 1 Fury onto the board when I could, and then riding that to victory a number of times. But I'm curious how often you guys were doing that, either in the blind or in particular matchups during your leagues.
Stan?
I think, given the choice between the two, I prefer to start with grief. If you have no other option, Fury is fine. I think the effectiveness of the turn 1 Fury is a little matchup dependent.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would agree. I think you always do the turn 1 grief and not the turn 1 Fury if you have the choice. But I'm kind of thinking I'm mulling to 6, and one of my options is a turn 1 Fury. I will very gladly do it in a pinch, depending on the matchup.
However, there is a little more removal out there floating around that kills the turn 1 Fury than you might feel like there is. Or at the beginning of when I was playing the deck, it felt like that was the right thing to do. Like I said a moment ago, it felt like that was the right thing to do. And then I started realizing, Leyline Binding certainly takes a lot out of that plan. You only get to hit them once with it. Also, Unholy Heat really takes a lot out of that plan. And so if someone's playing with Dragon's Rage Channeler like Murktide or something like that, and your Fury resolves, then they often are able to turn on Unholy Heat pretty early as well. So you can lose your Fury pretty early to a few different cards that people play a lot still. At first it felt really impervious to me, but then I started to really get a sense again of what was going on there. Now, on the other hand, Grief just straight up dies a lightning bolt. And so that's a problem as well.
Yeah, but the benefit of that is you can strip your opponent's hand of the things that kill your grief, which is kind of like the idea, right? So that's kind of the draw. It's hey, I'm going to take away their early interaction that could possibly kill my grief. I'm going to take out their kind of early creatures, or maybe something like their really powerful turn 3 play or something like that. Those are all kind of options you have.
Can we talk about stacking triggers really quickly here?
Oh God, I'm so bad at it.
Okay. You have to stack the evoke trigger so that it resolves last and the discard trigger resolves first when you play grief. Why is that?
I mean, you don't really have to. It's just strictly better to, right?
Yes, but why do you really need to do that? Stan?
In case they have instant speed graveyard hate.
That's a great one. The other one is in case they have Spell Pierce, because they can Spell Pierce your Feign Death to make you only have one trigger then. And if you play it the other way, they can't Spell Pierce your Grief, right? So you get to resolve your first discard trigger, see their hand, take their 1 mana counter spell potentially, and then play the Feign Death on your creature after the trigger resolves before the Evoke trigger resolves.
That's much better.
Super important against blue decks to be able to have that look at their hand and take 1 card before you're forced to decide whether you're going to cast Feign Death or not. I mean, a lot of times when I open their hand and like, let's say I played against somebody who had 2 Spell Pierces, I often went ahead and Feign Death anyway in that situation just to make them play the Spell Pierce so that I still got 2 cards out of their hand in the exchange. I just lost my creature.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's super important when you're playing Grief, is that you make sure that you get that look first. Because the other thing that you get is Lightning Bolt. And so if they try to cast Lightning Bolt in response to the trigger, then you can do Feign Death in response to their Lightning Bolt and use Feign Death as a counter spell, basically. So it's important. Do it. Make sure you do it.
I will. Yeah, there's a lot of it's definitely one of those things you have to get better at reading the stack on Magic Online than you might normally, because the ordering does matter, and the timing of when you cast your Feign Death and things like that, like you said, Dave, has a big impact on what could possibly happen and what your opponent can do to take advantage of you kind of doing it willy-nilly.
Yeah.
All right, so we got the Elementals. They're good. They're kind of the whole reason this deck exists, because I think otherwise, you're just playing... I mean, Rakdos Midrange does exist in the format, but I think that this deck is more consistently successful lately, and I think it's because you get to play free Elementals, and as we know, adding those to your deck usually makes it better in Modern Horizons 2 era Modern. All right, Ragavan. I mean, you know what this is.
Oh, can you remind me? Can you read the Oracle text? Can I get the Oracle text on Ragavan?
Yeah, you can. It's the best creature in Modern. That's what the Oracle text says. So why Ragavan in this deck? Well, 1, it's another turn 1 option. And 2, I think this deck does a really good job of letting you take advantage of what you want to be doing with Ragavan, which is making treasures. Because you have removal in some mix of Terminate and Fatal Push and Fury, but you also have essentially protection in your Undying spells, and you have looting outlets. So your Fable of the Mirror Breaker, your Seasoned Pyromancer, you can discard redundant copies if you are so lucky to have a Ragavan stick around, and you're like, well, I don't have any. I just have more in my hand. I'm just flooded with Ragavans. Well, you can discard them or loot them away and draw new cards. And so this kind of lets you use. It doesn't let you use all parts of the Buffalo, because Ragavan has 2 parts. But it lets you kind of, I think, take full advantage of what you want to do with Ragavan, as opposed to just have it as a. That's why it's not in Burn, and it is in this deck.
Yeah, I like your point about the removal spells. Terminate, Fatal Push, Fury. In addition to the hand disruption that Grief offers, but other cards in the deck offer too. Ragavan, in the absence of a turn 1 Undying play, lets you play a Rakdos tempo strategy sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also that protection thing that Shane was talking about is huge too. So the tempo there can be my cheap 1 mana spell protects my threat that you want to kill as well. It's similar to what Murktide tries to do with Ragavan realistically.
And I think much like Murktide and Ragavan, it's hey, I'm presenting a threat that needs to be dealt with, but also this deck is great at dashing out of Ragavan, in my opinion.
Yes, I you totally took the words out of my mouth.
Sorry,
I
man.
think no. I love what you said there, because I think one of the things that makes Grief maybe sometimes worse than turn 1 Fury is that Grief dies to Bolt, even if it has the 1/1 counter on it. And if you are getting cards out of your opponent's hand, so you're essentially 3-for-1ing them because you took 2 cards and then a removal spell out of their hand, your turn 2 dashed Ragavan becomes a pretty scary threat that they either have to keep up open mana or put down a blocker or try to dodge hand removal and your other interaction, because after you've traded so many resources that has impacted their hand, I think sometimes Ragavan is kind of your best way to maintain an advantage, or just keep the game stable before you find some late game closer.
And you have stuff to do with your mana. I mean, you dash it in, you get a treasure, and then you're like, sweet, I got up to 5 mana, so I can hard cast my Fury, and then I've got another threat for you to deal with. And so, like, it's just a really very solid Ragavan deck because it's not, much like in Rakdos Midrange of old, it's not just trying to be like a turn one play. It's like you get to really utilize it in every part of your game, and you can use it intelligently, I think, or even unintelligently in my case, and still get a lot out of it.
All right, Dalthy Voidwalker is one of the 2 drops of choice in this deck. You know it. Card is very
medium.
I mean, I think people thought it was going to be really, really good when it was spoiled, and it's fine, but it is kind of middle, right?
I think it's like a passable 2-drop on rate as just a 2-mana 3/2 unblockable that is sometimes a banger against opposing graveyard strategies, including the mirror, frankly.
Yeah.
I will say, though, that this is one of the cards that I will frequently side out if my opponent's graveyards just are irrelevant.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't need to have your deck be aggro here, so you don't have to keep it just to have an aggressive, a high power 2-drop. You don't need to have it just to have a Blood Tithe Harvester or whatever in your deck that you attack with. Like, you want the graveyard thing to be important.
I mean, it's nice that it's unblockable. It also doesn't block. And like, the sort of the incidental stuff, it does work with like, your discard spells and stuff like that, where every once in a while you can do something real bonkers and cast the card from whatever the counter it puts on the things. It's you get to do that fun stuff where you sacrifice Dalthy and get an Emrakul and live the dream. But yeah, largely it's like it drains your mana because it's black. And you don't really always want to have black sometimes, and sometimes it's kind of a challenge. But it's like a totally fine card.
Yep, exactly.
2 things: Blood Tithe Harvester. You said that in passing, David, but that's an interesting example to cite since you can pitch it to both Fury and Grief, and it's a 2-mana 3/2.
Strictly better.
It's it's one of those cards so crazy it just might work, right?
Well, I cite it because it's my least favorite card in Rakdos Mid and Pioneer.
Yes.
And it's similarly in Rakdos Mid and Pioneer for the same reason that, for example, Sprout says, but other people say that Dalthy Voidwalker is in this deck as well, is because it's the only 2-drop that's good that's available in Modern. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. Dalthy Voidwalker is fine. It's got a lot of text on it. It's a Modern Horizons 2 card.
Right.
You should probably just be playing it. But
man, what's funny is I do want to just be like, why don't we just play Dark Confidant? Let's just see what happens. No, then you draw like
Fury. You die to Fury.
Yeah, you just die to your Fury. Yeah, it's not going to work.
Big grief. Yeah.
All right, well, let's talk about what's doing the Dark Confidant imitation here, more or less, which is Seasoned Pyromancer. I think this card gets seen in varying numbers, which surprises me because I feel like this is a really good Seasoned Pyromancer deck.
I totally agree. This is the favorite deck for me that I've played Seasoned Pyromancer in a long time.
Agreed.
It's so good.
Yeah, I mean, it just does all the things you want CZ to be doing. Like, it's drawing you cards because you're throwing away a lot of cards. It's creating bodies, which is just always good. And again, it can be protected with Undying spell to like repeat the process if you so are inclined. Like my list ran 3, and I think I chose that list because it ran 3, and I was like, I want card draw in this deck, and I thought it was awesome.
I totally agree. And I can't, like, the number of jams that I got out of by trying to by using the Undying spell on this when it was dying, when I used it as a chump blocker to just get 2 more cards. It's fantastic.
And let's talk about why drawing cards is so important in this deck. Shane hints at it, right?
Because you run card negative.
Constantly. I can't think of another deck where I was just so frequently top decking Hellbent like by turn 4 or 5.
Yeah, totally agree.
And Spyro is just sort of your way to stay in the game a lot of times if your trading resources hasn't put you at an early advantage. Because your opponent may have had interaction, like maybe you got hit by a Solitude or a Lightning Bolt or even, a Terminate. I don't know.
Yeah, I just don't really know how you can play this deck and think Seasoned Pyromancer is like a questionable, like an option, in my opinion. Like just simply because of how the deck just requires you to spend cards in inefficient ways sometimes, and you have to refill. And like you're not gonna play like 3 Night's Whispers.
I agree. Although there is one way that you can see this card as an option that we'll talk about a little bit later. but
Sure.
I think it's a very good card, and I had a lot of fun playing it.
And then finally, Kroxa, usually just like a 1 or 2 of. Sometimes I felt it's just kind of like there. Like it's not a great Kroxa deck.
Hated it. I love Kroxa. I hated it in this deck. Got to be honest.
I mean, it's,
Guys,
Do you love
you
it?
live the dream. You
I
Undying it a
completely
few
disagree.
times.
I never did that because it doesn't work how you want it to. But
Why not?
I actually, because if
Oh yeah, you have to escape it. Yeah.
you have to escape it for it to stick around. So if you're just putting Undying Malice on it, it's just you're again just kind of 2-for-1ing yourself just to take 2 cards out of their hand. It's just like double. It's 3 mana for 2 Thoughtseizes that you don't get to pick. It's mind rot, right?
True.
But I will say, because I was hellbent so often, and like if I was facing up against interactive decks, and again, like I was playing against 4-color control a lot, so it's just like a lot of my turn 1 Griefs and Furies were getting solituded. I felt like Kroxa was the way I was just kind of like eventually closing games. Either because the trigger burning my opponent for 3 gave me a little extra reach, or my graveyard would just get so full of cards at a certain point because of fetches, my stuff hitting the graveyard, other interaction, what have you. Like Kroxa was just like the way to close out a game as kind of like this really big threat that provides you immediate value.
Here's the problem I had with it. And I could be wrong, but like I said, I've loved Kroxa in like Shadow for a long time. I never wanted to spend 2 mana to play this card to have it go to the graveyard, which is fine. Sure, you can discard it to Pyromancer, discard it to Fable or whatever, but it just always felt like really awkward because I always wanted to be doing something else on turn 2 rather than that, whether that was dashing Ragavan, playing a removal spell. I don't know. Like for this one, it just didn't hit for me in this one. In fact, so much that the second list that I kind of went back to when I did a second league with this deck, I just cut Kroxa completely from the deck and didn't even run it.
Interesting. I don't disagree. Like it's not the turn 2 play I want to make, but it's the late game play I often wanted to make. And there would be a lot of situations where I was happier with a late game Kroxa than a late game Grief, for instance.
But this deck's all about the early game when you're doing that stuff in some ways.
Ideally, if it's humming, it's about the early game.
Even though it's a mid-range deck. But
I mean, you know what the best thing about Kroxa is, Dave, is that you just pitch it to Fury and Grief. So there we go. You don't have to worry about it.
So I actually think that's a pretty big plus for this card. Realistically, for a reason to play it, because it's a card that you're okay pitching. You don't really want to get rid of Terminate. Terminate's good in so many different matchups. I mean, sometimes you'll get rid of whatever if you think that Grief is the right thing to do. Of course, turn 1 Grief, but I do think that's a point in Kroxa's favor, Shane, for real.
All right, we talked about the creatures.
Yeah,
I feel like this deck is. I mean, besides the elementals, I feel like it's a little bit more about the spells. And Dave, why don't you tell us about how these how this Undying stuff actually works?
Yeah, so I'm going to read the first one. I'm going to read the ones that are the same card. So Undying Malice and Feign Death, they're literally the same. It's black for an instant that says, until end of turn, target creature gains. When this creature dies, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it. The same card. 2 of these are the same card. This is what you do, is that
very easy for rule of 8 needs.
Cast it. You're going to have a lot of these. Fortunately, they do stuff a little bit more than just be part of the combo. You can use them as a one mana piece of protection, like we talked about earlier, that can bring a creature back, bring in a creature that someone might not expect you to use this on, like a Ragavan or a Seasoned Pyromancer. Sometimes, someone kills your Grief after you do the big play when you have mana up and you have another one of these in your hand, so then you play it to bring back your creature, your Grief again. So these cards are surprisingly flexible, I think, especially when you know that they're part of your plan.
How does this work with Evoke?
Well, I mean, Evoke, of course, is that you exile the card from your hand, but Evoke is the creature dies, it's sacrificed. So because it goes to the battlefield this turn, it just returns to the battlefield again, like it's a normal death for the evoked creature. There's nothing special about it. It's just like a combat death. So these cards apply. The conditions for these cards apply.
And it's also why like Graveyard Hate or like Rest in Peace or Leyline of the Void means your creature doesn't actually hit the graveyard, so it doesn't actually die. So that's why they don't work there, right? And then It also gives your opponents like this opportunity to use sort of trigger, like a activated graveyard hate, to kind of zap your creature out while it's still in the graveyard, but before it re-enters the battlefield, right?
Yeah, hugely important because Unlicensed Hearse, Stan's favorite card from Streets of New Capenna, is everywhere, and it's used everywhere. Ledger Shredder is probably actually your favorite. I see you thinking. I imagine Ledger Shredder you like better, but anyway, it's hugely important because there's so many things that have this kind of passive graveyard hate part to them now. People are looking for it, and it does hurt your combo a lot. And we can talk a little bit about thinking about sideboarding and what to do when someone brings in graveyard hate against you, but let's save that for a minute because there's two other cards that show up in this deck a lot. There's Undying Evil, which also is a single black. It's a lot like these other two cards, but it just is from Dark Ascension, and it gives a creature Undying, which says if it doesn't have a 1/1 counter on it, it comes back to play when it dies with a 1/1 counter on it. We're all familiar with that from playing against Yawgmoth. And then it has Malakir Rebirth, which is a double face card from what's that Zendikar set? Is that one called Zendikar Rising?
Yeah, Zendikar again.
Zend again. And this card
Still
says...
zending after all these years.
Exactly. Weekend at Zendy's too. Choose target creature. You lose 2 life until end of turn. That creature gains. When this creature dies, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner control. Look, people play some combination of these cards that basically adds up to 7, right?
Yeah.
So it's basically 2 Feigned Death, 2 Undying Malice, 2 Malakir Rebirth, 1 Undying Evil. That's what you see in a lot of the lists. I will say I have to I really agreed with the Sprout. Again, the primer, after reading through some of these cards, at first I was kind of like, wow, Undying Evil is amazing. Why isn't everybody playing Undying Evil all the time? Well, the reason is that mostly that one gets played as one of, and the reason is because it doesn't affect a creature that already has a counter on it. So you can't use it to save a creature that already has been Feigned Deathed or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's huge. That's enough of a knock-on consistency for me that in the second build that I tried, I just cut Undying Evil. I was like, I'm not playing this
I did
card.
not play it.
I want to know what I'm doing. It comes into play untapped, which is why you would play Undying Evil at all. It comes back as a blocker, which sometimes is important.
My removal spells are my blockers.
I kind of agree, and mostly I just want to know what my cards are doing. I don't want to have a reliable kind of game plan. And then Malakir Rebirth, I just was not into it at all. Like, I just ended up cutting that as well. The life loss is terrible. The fact that it doesn't bring back the creature with a counter is kind of terrible. I just didn't like having this card as part of the package.
I don't want tapped lands. It's just like I don't want a black source that doesn't get through Blood Moon. Like, there's all sorts of reasons I don't want to play this card.
Yeah. So honestly, the second time I played this deck, I just ran 4 Feigned Death and 3 Undying Malice. I think a lot of people also thought it was kind of cute to run all these different cards that are kind of the same thing in case you run up against Meddling Mage. You're not playing a Meddling Mage in Modern? What year is it? Like, we're not seeing that card right now anywhere.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Hammer sideboards.
Don't they just run Lavinia, though?
Why not both?
Why not both? We'll ask a Hammer player next time we play that deck.
We got a bunch of other
Anyway.
Rakdos spells that we all know and all love.
Yeah.
I think we can go through these rapid fire.
Thoughtseize.
Sure, we love them.
Yeah, if you're playing a black midrange deck, you're playing Thoughtseize. Lightning Bolt. Surprisingly, only a 2 or 3 of, but it's Bolt. That's what we have these days, 2 or 3 of Bolts. Terminate. How do you guys feel about Terminate?
It's super important.
Love any reason to put Terminate in a deck in this year,
Right?
2022.
Can't believe we just are playing with Terror, but lots of decks are playing with Terror, and it's all thanks to Murktide Regent, as everybody knows.
I mean, it just hits everything.
It just hits everything. Yeah, it's really good.
Kolaghan's Command.
Did you guys play at main? I did not play at main.
I had one main that got sided out a lot.
I don't think I played it main, no.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a 2 for 1, but it always costs 3 mana. So,
yeah,
there you go.
It's the only 3 mana. I mean, it's one of the only 3 mana things, right?
Okay, Night's Whisper. Draw 2 cards, lose 2 life for 1 in the black. Efficient and painful, but draws you cards.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. It feels important, but it never really feels like it's enough.
I cut it from my first list. I was like, I was getting rid of all these one-ofs. The second time I went through this, I was like, I don't want one of Night Whisper.
I'm just playing more Seasoned Pyromancer.
That's exactly what I did, honestly, but not really Seasoned Pyromancer. because the list that I had originally had all this stuff in favor of Fable the Mirror Breaker.
Right.
So what I ended up doing was running 5 total of those. I ran 3 Pyromancers and 2 Fables, but we'll get to Fable in a minute.
Let's talk about Fable now.
Knight's Whisper,
let's run into it.
Knight's Whisper is fine is the bottom line, but it, like you said, Stan, it never really felt as powerful as some of these other options. So
I think Knight's Whisper is underrated. I gotta say, I think it's an underrated card. I think it's always been underrated because you don't get effects like this for for 2 mana, especially in black. It's like 2 life. Who cares? I mean, it matters, but
I feel like there's like a 1,000-word essay here into like 2 mana draw 2s and the good chaotic chart of just like this versus expressive iteration versus
Knight's Whisper is lawful evil.
Yeah, whatever else there is.
Yeah.
But anyway, I mean, I think it's fine, but like, I think that it's just like it feels like a necessary evil, but I still feel like I don't mind playing it. But maybe if the meta was like skewing towards more aggressive decks or like burn or things where I felt my life total was like more under threat more often, I'd be like, okay, we're moving towards like a Seasoned Pyromancer or shaving some Knight's Whispers or other types of tuning.
I will say I never took it out in my games 2s and 3s. And I almost feel like this is a better card to play on turn 2 than Kroxa. Like if I have a turn 1 Grief or Fury, turn 2 Knight's Whisper just to like keep me in the game, especially if my opponent didn't necessarily like perform an action that I had to think about or immediately respond to, seemed totally fine.
Yeah. I think it's fine. I just had other stuff I wanted to do instead, which, like I said, is just run those faithless Seasoned Pyromancer effects over it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Fable. This is 2 weeks in a row we're talking about Fable of the Mirror Breaker decks. This
in
version,
modern.
In modern. This version really only ever runs like 2 to 3 at most. I don't think I ever saw any with the full grip. It's not bad. It kind of makes some of your decisions wonky about like whether or not you try to get to 5 lands as quickly as possible to Fury, or if you start holding back lands after a while so that you can hold on to action and pitch stuff to chapter 2 on the Fable.
Yeah. No, I do think it's tough in that sense, for sure. I just wanted it to have more card flow, basically. Right. I mean, the treasure is nice. This deck often feels like it runs light on mana. Sometimes you feel like you aren't getting your land drops. You're willing to keep a 1 or 2 lander pretty often in this deck,
Well, I don't know about you guys, but I think I was playing an 18 lander. Maybe it was a 19 land deck. Like it is really slim pickings because it's such like an explosive, ideally strategy.
Yeah,
I think that's something I want to talk a little bit more about when we get to the land, the mana base, because I think there's a lot to discuss there.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yeah. But I just felt like I said, my first league that I played, I didn't have Fable in my deck, and I really just wanted more Seasoned Pyromancers, and so I ended up running a set of some of each. Yeah. And it was that I would do that again. I would still do that. I'm in the middle of that league still. I think it's the right decision.
I think one of the reasons you also played this card is to live the dream and have a reflection of Kiki so that you can start making copies of Grief or Fury. I played 2 leagues and I could never get there.
I died to it in a mirror.
Wow.
Before I swapped Fable into my deck. That was part of the thing that convinced me, where I was like, oh, I need to run Fable because these people are just crushing me with multiple griefs every turn.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good effect. Like you said, I think the mana is really important. The looting is really important. I mean, weird. All the things that Fable Mirror Breaker does are good. Who would have thought?
Who'd have thought? I mean, the dream that they really lived against me, Stan, is I was hell-bent. They got their reflection of Kiki Jiki online with Grief, had me draw a card and copied it in my upkeep or whatever, in my draw step. Yeah, great. Thanks.
Ouchies.
Yeah, living the dream.
Ouchie boo-boo. Real quick, Agdeem's Awakening. It's a land, but it's also a black source that you can pitch to Grief. At most, it's a 1-of.
Yeah, I cut it too. Though later on, I was like, nah, I'm not.
So, Dave, did you run like a second league with your version of
I
Rakdos?
found a list that was kind of doing this. Okay. That was basically, But these are all basically I just went through and cut a lot of the 1-ofs, or I found a list that was cutting all these 1-ofs in favor of more Fables, Magus of the Moon in addition to Blood Moon main, and I think that mostly there's not that much to play around with, so I think that kind of made up for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is a Blood Moon deck. It's a main deck Blood Moon deck.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Definitely stole some wins with that card. As always.
Yeah. So it can even turbo it out on turn 2 if you have a turn 1 Ragavan that connects on turn 2.
Yeah, that rules. I love doing that. Definitely have done that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's also nice that you basically only need to fetch 2 swamps and you're Blood Moon proof.
Yeah, it's hugely important. It's good to remember that you need to go and get swamps with your fetch lands.
Yeah.
Like, you can't be fixing your mana necessarily all the time with Blood Crypt. If you're considering Blood Mooning people at all, make sure to get 2 basic mountains, or 2 basic swamps is the big thing to do for sure.
Yeah.
I definitely ran into a little bit of strain where it's like I'm trying to do an early Blood Moon, and I try to get the double black, but then I never draw another land, and I get like a Seasoned Pyromancer because it's a slightly land light deck. But like those are isolated things when I think the power of Blood Moon is likely better than you getting the Seasoned Pyromancer down.
Yeah, or you just realize that the only way you're going to play Grief is by evoking it.
Yeah,
basically, and you're just not casting Douthie, or you're relying on Ragavan to fix your mana. That's the other thing that you can do. So.
Yeah, there's
or
lots
Shaman
of
tokens.
Yeah, Shaman.
Or Shaman tokens.
Treasure,
yeah, sorry,
Shaman
tokens too.
Perfect.
Yep. See, that's why I wanted them in there.
Yeah. I mean, I love having a main deck Blood Moon deck. I think it's a great aspect to cheesing out some wins. You're already cheesing out some wins by stripping their hand, and then Blood Moon down is just sometimes could be GG's.
Yeah. I don't think this necessarily has to be a Blood Moon deck forever. Especially in a post-Yorion world, Leyline Binding might change that equation, but like if the popularity of binding decks wane a little bit, I can see Scam cutting some number of Blood Moons to just have a little bit more like 3s and 4-ofs.
Yeah.
Whereas
have more Fables, have more Seasoned Pyromancer, have more removal spells.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not relying on it. It's not like a prison deck. It's trying to cheese it out. It's just like, hey, this is some gravy. And our deck, the deck runs a mana base that can support it. So might as well.
Mm-hmm. This next one's interesting because I didn't play it, but I wanted it. After my second league, I was like, I wish I had played a version of this deck that had main deck Liliana.
Really?
Of the Veil. And it's specifically because, I said it before, I'll say it again, I just found that I was like hellbent constantly. And that's the kind of Planeswalker I want to play when I'm just when I'm living off the top of my deck and can maybe force my opponent to parity at that point. Because there are so many situations where my opponent was not on a, quote unquote card advantage deck, but I felt like I was still getting buried in their cards just because I've been throwing stuff away to get a board that they've managed to answer really quickly. And Liliana can pick off some creatures with the Edict effect, or potentially like get my opponent down to fewer cards in hand without really punishing me for that in the process.
I didn't feel like I missed her, but I also can see the utility. It's just like, we're to the point where Lily is a fringe playable in the format, and like maybe I'd rather have more Blood Moons or more Fable of the Mirror Breakers or more Seasoned Pyromancer or, whatever.
The answer here for me. It was a 1 of in the first deck I ran. I turned it into something else.
Great. I didn't even have her in the sideboard though, and I think that's kind of the thing that like I would probably do next if I was to revisit this deck.
We know these cards. That's the thing that we were saying off the top, is that these cards are a good shell that it has existed in Modern, at least since Modern Horizons 2. Many of these cards, of course, before that. And it's a good deck. The Elemental plan just gives it that bump that I think makes it actually work in the format, basically.
All right. Stanislav, do you want to talk about, perhaps, I think you maybe played the most of all of us on this. Like, how did you view playing this deck? Like, what was your approach?
Try to have a proactive plan that involved a turn 1 play. And that's basically what I'm mulliganing to a point. Like I'm not going down to 4 cards.
Sure. Do you do like an order that like of turn 1 plays you prefer?
Yeah, I mean, you prefer the turn 1 Grief, turn 1 Fury is keepable, turn 1 Ragavan is serviceable.
Yeah. Funny that's kind of the worst one.
Wow, that's an interesting question. Because here's the thing with turn 1 Thoughtseize. Like, yeah, you can do it, but what are you doing the rest of the game is kind of the question.
Yeah.
Like, if your hand is like Thoughtseize, Kroxa, Interaction.
Yeah. You're dying.
In the blind,
I think you have to ship it. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like let's say this. Like, let's say you have a turn one grief you're going to do, right? Like, but sometimes I think depending on the matchup, you might actually not. Like maybe like Thoughtseize is good for clearing the way in like known matchups, or for your turn two Fury, where you're like, what kind of stuff do they have in their hand? Is my Fury going to get there? Do I want to save it for creatures?
I think if you're on the draw, it makes a difference too, right? Like, don't you want to, like if they have mana open because they didn't make a turn one play and they're waiting to see what you do, then if you turn one Thoughtseize them, you can at least see what's going on to decide if you really want to try to do the evoke plan or not on turn two, which slows you down and leaves the door open for them to do stuff. But
yeah, I'm totally thinking this on the fly, to be honest, but I almost wonder if a turn one Thoughtseize is really good if you're going to back it up with a turn two Fury or Ragavan Dash.
Yeah.
Because turn one Grief is better than a turn one Thoughtseize.
Correct.
Sure. I mean, honestly, though, there's something to be said, I think, for a turn one Thoughtseize backed up by a turn two Grief. Like, you know what I mean? Like, let's say you saw a Lightning Bolt game one or something like that, and you're just like, hey, I want this Grief to stick for a while because I don't have a lot of threats backing this thing up. So turn one, I'll get rid of a piece of removal. Turn two, I'll grief them twice, and I'm off to the races and leave them top decking.
So I agree with you there if you're on the draw. I think that's really clear. Like, if you're on the play, why not just grief them, take two cards, like take their two removal spells?
Yeah, you're right. On the draw. I was thinking on the like, don't leave your grief open to removal if you don't have to.
Right, exactly. But other than that, like, this isn't like a great turn one Thoughtseize deck, or at least that's not necessarily what this deck is trying to do. And if it's doing that, it's because it probably has a really powerful spell or plan to back it up on turn two, and then maybe even like a turn three Blood Moon or Fable to just like kind of keep you in the game and generate value erstwhile.
How bad did you feel playing Fury and not getting any cards off of it? It's okay,
depends.
Right? Like, it's not great. It's okay, right?
You know what the real problem is?
What's that?
So double strike does not mean that it kills the creature in the first part in the first strike effect and then gets damage in the regular damage. It's blocked. No, it's blocked and then it's blocked.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, this is how Magic works.
Yes.
It does not have trample.
So when I was playing, I was like, ha ha ha, your 1/1 is gonna block it on the first strike part. I'm gonna get 4 damage in. And I was like, oh wait, that's not how Magic works.
You used to play Death Shadow.
No, I played it very poorly. I was not good at that part of the game.
I think there's just like enough decks in the format that cannot beat a turn one Fury.
Yeah, like, sometimes they just can't. They just can't. Even if they're blocking it for like a couple turns, you're just like, you have no chance.
Yeah, like that's a great play against Murktide, I think.
Except for they can turn on Unholy Heat. Like the couple of times I did that against Murktide, I would get an attack in and then they would Unholy Heat.
And then hopefully you have like another Undying effect would be sweet.
But turning on Unholy Heat takes a few turns.
Yeah. Well, it takes a fetch. I mean, it takes a fetch, a bauble, a lightning bolt, and a creature. That's all it takes.
Right, but if you're furying for no reason, how are you getting that creature in the board? Like, that assumes that they've had a Ledger Shredder out or something, and they're doing it.
I mean, I think it's hard to ride that one creature to victory. I think if you have a backup like Undying effect, then I think you stand a much better chance. But
sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
I will say, I started out thinking that this deck was pretty good against Murktide, and then I sort of ended up. Now, this might have been because I played a match against Zach Allen online where he was playing Murktide and I was on this deck. And I was like, maybe this deck is terrible against Murktide or just not as good as I thought against it. But anyway.
So far, I think this podcast has an 0-2 record against Zach Allen in leagues because I've lost to him as well.
He's a super nice guy. We had a nice chat and it was a great match.
Awesome.
I got to be honest.
They always are.
So, but it was,
I mean, let's talk about after turn one. I feel like that's when stuff just sort of becomes a Rakdos midrange deck, where it's like, depending on what the deck is giving you and what the opponent's doing, like I'm like playing more threats to try to take over the board, or I'm like removing their threats, or I'm trying to like get a little bit of card advantage back and some card draw, or I'm like maybe locking them down with a Blood Moon effect, or like dashing out Ragavans, or like eventually hard casting my Elementals to try to take over that late game. Like the deck just gives you a lot of options. And hopefully they're the right ones for the situation.
Yeah. However, I just want to draw an underline under one thing here, which is the one way that it's different is that you have protection spells in your deck, that protect your threats from removal. And they also allow you to do interesting things with come into play abilities. And so if you play this mindset where you're like, this deck has a combo that I can do on turn 1, but the pieces of the combo after turn 1 are kind of garbage, you're not going to get the most out of the cards that are in this deck when you're playing. They're not good cards. Feign Death and Undying Malice and the others are not good cards. But they are in fact cards, and you can get value out of them if you stay open to the situations where it's going to come up that you can. So that's the one thing I would say that makes it different from most Rakdos decks is you have those cards you need to figure out how to get value out of.
They're like these weirdly modal counterspells.
Yeah.
Where they have a very specific mode on turn 1 and then a very different mode later in the game. And that late game mode is sometimes pretty bad. It's like a spell pierce.
Or extremely surprising.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Because people will be like,
true.
oh,
that's
no.
True.
Yeah.
I've made a huge mistake.
Yeah.
Should we talk about like some of the deck's strengths and weaknesses?
Definitely. What do you think? What was the main thing that you thought was strong about this deck when you were playing it, Stan? Unsure?
I thought that the games where I had a turn 1 grief backed up by additional interaction, including like a turn 2 Thoughtseize plus a bolt or a terminate, I kind of just felt like that was some of the strongest starts I've ever piloted or seen in Modern. Like a turn 1 grief plus more action just feels like almost unbeatable, since you're stripping all the good cards out of your opponent's hand while making a very potent evasive threat that, a 4 will close out a game fast enough, especially if your opponent has fetches and if you find a bolt or some other way to like just do a few points of damage to the face. Like sometimes that turn 1 grief will just close out the game on turn 4.
Agree.
So I think that's one of the strengths is like it just has one of the craziest turn 1 starts in the format, period.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest strength of this deck, basically, is that everybody's trying to do powerful stuff on turn 2 or turn 3 in Modern, and this deck has a really strong turn 1 that disrupts them, and so in the best case disrupts them anyway. So you can use that.
Yeah. And I think we often say, and we hear other Modern players talk about how turn 1 Ragavan is just like one of the best plays in the format right now. I think this deck challenges that notion. And this is the deck that it's almost like the exception that proves the rule, where it's a Ragavan deck, but it doesn't always want to play a Ragavan on 1 because its other cards are better on 1. And in certain matchups, as we've said, like a turn 1 Fury sort of meets that same condition, where it's just like Fury plus some hand disruption or additional removal spells for certain decks is just like basically unbeatable.
And I think it's consistent at doing something meaningful early. You know what I mean? I think that it's consistent at getting your grief, undying thing going on, or you can mulligan to it without much of a concern. Like, I think that you have a good amount of options to present like questions to your opponent while also potentially even stripping out the answers from their hand with the grief thing. Like it's flexible and powerful. And I think that that's really, something that you can't underestimate in Modern, which is sometimes I think you give up one of those two things. Like it's like, hey, I do something great, but it's hard for me to do. Or it's like, I'm doing something, I'm playing a bunch of merfolk consistently, but they're not that great. And so I think this kind of splits the proverbial uprights that I'm always looking for, which is like, what's it doing and how hard is it to do it?
Totally agree. And part of that consistency comes from a deck that can mulligan pretty well, right? I think that it's painful because you're on a card disadvantage kind of plan, but you do often mull into a combo that you can make happen because you have 8 pieces on either side. You have basically, you have 7 Feign Death effects and you have 4 pitch elementals. And so there's a lot of hands that come out of a 7 or a 6 where you can do one of these on turn 1. Lots of combinations. However, is that what we're mulliganing to most times? Stan, you said that you're basically trying to mulligan to a proactive turn 1 play. That includes Ragavan in your mind. I think that is basically what you should be shooting for, but you can't mulligan down the way that you might when you're playing like a Rhinos deck or something like that. If you really feel like, okay, I'm going to get some Violent Outburst and X and go for it. This deck, you won't recover if you do that.
I agree. And that's why it's kind of puzzling to me when I hear people say how well this deck mulligans, because I see and feel both sides of the argument. Like, yeah, sometimes you can mulligan to like a really killer grief or fury start, but other times you'll do that, you'll multi-5, you'll have a killer turn 1, and then you get hit with a solitude, and you just sort of feel like the game is over.
Yeah. And it kind of is. If you mulled the 5 to get that, it is over.
Yeah, which is why I think that the deck mulligans well, but I think that there are some questionable decisions that people get with getting greedy about the card redraw. Like, I think that you have to really bear in mind that, like we've been saying, is that you can operate at a deficit. And if you're not running a significant number of either looting effects, but those are still, you have to have cards to throw away to draw those back up. So whether you're running enough Night's Whispers or Seasoned Pyromancer or potentially Fable effects, like, I think you want to be able to recover from the bad mulls, where it's like, yeah, I started at 5, I got a grief in twice, but then what? They removed it, and I'm top decking, and I draw another, tap land or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of lands, though, I think another strength of this deck is that it operates at both low mana counts and high mana counts.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's like, you could operate with 1 mana for a couple turns pretty easily. But then if you get into the late game and you're like, hey, I've got 5 mana, I was usually happy, because then I'm like, sweet, I get to hard cast this Fury. I don't have to try to like do something weird or evoke it just to clear something out. I get to get my 3/3 double striker on the board.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's kind of the interesting points where really need to be careful about keeping a 1-lander where your only turn 1 or 1 mana play is Ragavan, because Ragavan is so easy to kill. But a 1-lander plus the grief combo usually feels okay.
Yeah, exactly.
For sure.
Especially, and I think that becomes even more true if you have more Faint Death cards in hand, where you can like do that several times if your opponent is trying to, I don't know, not exile, destroy your creature.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the weaknesses of the deck. I mean, number one is it's weak to exile effects. Your plan is like Leyline Binding and Solitude and stuff is brutal against your deck.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a really, really rough. You invest all this in there. Maybe they have to spend 2 cards, but you just have no way to get out of it, and it costs them low mana in either of those cases, really.
Yeah, like I had someone, I played against Azorius Control. They had March of Otherworldly Light, and so they might have to pitch a card at the same time, but like, they're getting an important creature of yours off the battlefield, so that can be kind of annoying. And like, not only battlefield exile, but graveyard exile. So of course that messes with the combo aspect of your deck as well. You do have other options to rely on, but you do lose kind of the killer app aspect of your deck. You're losing the primary thing, and if you're waiting till turn 4 to hardcast a Grief or turn 5 to hardcast like a Fury, you're not necessarily doing what you signed up for. I do think that, there's not like a bunch of amazing stuff you're doing on turn 2. I think that that's kind of a hole in your curve. I don't think it's like a ridiculous one, because you do have enough options, whether it's dashing Ragavan or casting a Night's Whisper or something like that, or just like Thoughtseize, Lightning Bolt. There's a bunch of stuff you can do. You frequently don't have a lot of cards to double spell on turn 2. So it's just kind of like, it's a hole in the deck perhaps, and maybe people aren't looking at that as strongly as they could be in terms of other options. Like maybe we are playing Blood Tithe Harvester in a month. I don't think so. I don't think that's...
No, I don't think so either. No, that's not happening.
Yeah, just play more Croxa.
And the last thing I noticed is going to the mana, like I mentioned earlier. I think the mana is like unnecessarily greedy for reasons I can't really tell. Like, I think it uses mana so well that, like, why are we playing like 18 to 20 lands? And some of them are like, if you're playing Malakir Rebirth, are coming to play tapped lands. Like, I think that we could maybe trim some of the fat in the deck list and just be like, I'm a 22 land deck, so I more consistently am casting my Griefs and Furies personally.
Yeah, I feel like I've had to mulligan way too much with this deck just because of not having the combo and also not having 2 lands, or straight up just drawing no lands a lot of times with this deck online. So, the shuffler's broken and is against me and all that kind of stuff. But I agree, Shane. I don't know why this deck, it should just be like a 22 land deck. Let's not get crazy with the double face cards and stuff, I think.
I think it also has some glaring weaknesses against specific cards. Teferi, Time Raveler is surprisingly good against the combo. It makes a turn 3 Teferi makes it really hard to do an Undying thing late in the game because you can't target your creatures with Undying if the trigger's on the stack.
Hang on one second, though. This is another spot where you would want to make sure that you order your evoke trigger the right way, though. Because if you do this with Fury,
Sure,
and you put, you know what I mean? You put the triggers in the right order, you kill Teferi, resolve that, then cast your Feign Death. Most likely kill Teferi anyway, but just worth noting.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The other thing is potentially a moot point after today's ban news, but the 4-color matchup felt abysmal to me. And it's almost like the exact opposite of this deck where all of your actions 2 for 1 yourself, all of the 4-color actions get them card advantage. And it just felt like their strategy was designed to beat you. Future Omnath decks could continue to be a problem, I think, for scam strategies. Here's another one that kind of took me by surprise whenever it happened. Any Karn deck that whips out an Ensnaring Bridge feels almost unbeatable. Unless I can just go runner with some bolts and Kroxa.
You do get to run Artifact Hate in this deck, at least. You have
Not
Kolaghan's
main.
Command. You have Kolaghan. You should have Kolaghan's Command. I mean, that's one reason to run one Kolaghan's Command anyway. It's that meme of putting the one card over the bad matchup. But you do get to run a Braid and 2, which is
Sure.
not get to. You have to run 1, but
Yeah, I mean, you can show it up sideboard with Ingot Chewer and whatnot. So I mean, it's helpful. But like you said, yeah, you do have some holes in game 1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what else? What else do I hate seeing? Like we talked about ley lines, but Leyline of Sanctity is I think something somewhat increasing because of all of the popularity of this deck. Because you do target them with Grief, you target them with Thoughtseize and things like that. So I think that shores up kind of the best thing you can be doing on turn 1 against the Leyline of Sanctity is not so good.
and then of course we talked about Leyline of Binding.
Yeah,
The Leyline of Binding, which is a problem as well. All those exile effects are bad.
Yeah. Nasty.
Do you want to breeze to the sideboard really fast? Just kind of talk about some options and what you might bring them in against.
If you rapid fire us through it.
Sure, why not? Engineered explosives. It's kind of what you want to be doing. Rhinos, hammer, artifact, token stuff. Sanctifier Onvec out of hammer or burn is something extremely bad that you do not want to see. And you have to have ways to kill it, and EE is a very good way to kill it.
Yes, so is Roiling Vortex. Really strong against your evoked elementals.
Yeah.
And Pyrite Spellbomb gets run in the sideboard sometimes to get rid of Sanctifier as well.
I mean, I especially would with how popular Hammer is right now, and Unvec is a known tech against this deck. It's increasing in popularity. Have a Pyrite Spellbomb, perhaps. Turok Dread Cantor, sometimes in the main even. It's a solid option against heavy white decks like Azorius Control and 4-color Omnath. Hopefully we'll see less of that. Also, this dodges Leyline Binding. I don't know if you're winning a game off the back of Turok, but there you go.
You absolutely can.
Sweet.
For sure,
Perfect.
in those matchups, yeah.
Hidetsugu consumes all. Finally get to have a deck to play Hidetsugu. Another kind of EE effect. I feel like I might just want more EEs, but Hidetsugu is cool. Unlicensed Hearse, we talked about that. Anti-Graveyard, Necromentia combo / near combo hate like Cascade decks or Yawgmoth. Fatal Push if you want more cheap creature removal. Magus of the Moon if you want something that doesn't die to Boseiju. A Braid for artifacts, weird. And also creature decks. Chalice of the Void, Cascade hate. Cobrew, anti-burn. Ingot Chewer, which is a 3/3 that can be evoked for just a red mana, and then you can use an Undying effect. It kills artifacts, gives you a 3/3 or a 4/4 on the board if it has a +1/+1 counter. Those are kind of the main things that I saw looking back at the past few months of the deck. Or those are the main options I saw.
God, I would love for us to do an entire episode of Shane rapid firing cards and what they're used for.
We've got episode 200 coming up, so
that's our Modern Horizon set reviews. Are that
overall thoughts, my friends?
I mean, I'll go first. I really enjoyed this deck, and the thing is, in my leagues, I did worse than I did with creativity with this deck, bottom line record speaking. But I enjoyed this deck a lot more, and I just think that it's more interactive. All of my matches went to 3 games. All of them were interesting. All of them, I can trace them to mistakes that I think that I made that I think I can improve on in the future. I think the deck is hard to play, but I really enjoyed it. I will definitely be going back to more of this.
Shane, this is a deck that you've been talking about wanting to try for a while.
Yeah.
Did it meet your expectations?
So I met my expectations. I mean, full disclosure, I was still sick a lot of last week. Even through this weekend, I was just like in COVID brain and still kind of am. So I only got like 5 matches in. But what I liked the fact that it felt like I was doing different things, different games. I liked playing. These are all cards I like playing, right? Like, and that's the best thing is I get to play with cards I like. And like, that's a blast. Like every card is a card I like. I mean, besides, even the Undying effects, just because they let me do what I want to do. It's not like I'm like looking for an Undying Malice deck or something. But the fact that I get to play like Blood Moon and Fable and Ragavan and even Dauthi Voidwalker, which was a card that like I was super hype on in the spoiler season, and Grief and Fury, it's like this is all sweet stuff. I get to Thoughtseize people. I get to make decisions about cards that I'm taking from their hands. I get to poke holes in their game plan. I get to try to ride out a turn 1 Fury against a control deck, and it gets there, and that's like sweet, and all that kind of stuff was a blast. And I think that the deck, like you were getting at, Stan, is it does things that other decks cannot do. Like no other deck besides like a Orzhov deck that's ephemerating Grief really can do this game plan, and it's kind of a fun game plan. It's fun to mess with your opponent's game plan. Like I have people scoop when that happens on turn 1. You know what I mean? It's just like scoop. Like I'm not even going to play this game out because you're going to take 2 cards. So it's fun. I mean, like it's going into my like paper deck quiver. It's going to be one of the few things that I would consider taking to like a game night next time I go or play with friends, or when we go to our next event together, I will definitely have this deck with me unless something like dramatically nerfs it. So anyway, you get the idea.
Totally. Yeah, I guess I'll close out the section. This is a weird situation where I wanted to enjoy playing this deck than I did in practice. And Shane, I think you're speaking to something that I sort of felt, which is the dexterity of this deck seems like it would be really fun to play in paper in a way that online just feels like you're so focused on ordering your triggers that it takes a little bit of the magic out of it.
Yeah, like once I forgot, I didn't cast Undying Malice at the right time, and like my card went to the graveyard before I was like, man, that was stupid. Like that would never happen in paper.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mentioned that I felt like I was constantly hellbent, which I didn't love. But on the other hand, I did feel like when the deck was cooking, I was just doing like the strongest thing imaginable. And for that reason, it was really fun. So kind of a give and take. I played 2 leagues. I went 4 and 6. So got, buy 2 leagues, get 1 free, basically, which is fine. I will add the last point. My wins rarely felt close. It almost feels like when I did my turn 1 Grief, or in certain situations the turn 1 Fury, like it was so effective at running away with the game that, assuming I had other good cards in hand and could interact with opponents' hands or boards, it just seemed like the strategy, when explosive, runs away with a lot of games that any other 1-drop just probably couldn't do.
I like the long games too, though. You know what I mean? Where it's like a Ragavan makes a couple treasure tokens, or like my Shaman token makes a treasure token, and I get to hard cast the Fury like turn 5 or 6, and like that is what I can ultimately ride to victory. Like it feels fun to like get to those points too, where it's like you're doing something fun early and fun late, which is one of the strengths I mentioned earlier. Like it can use the mana well if you go long, and I like that too.
I think what this deck really needs for me is some more Skelementals.
Do it. Do Skelemental Elementals. Skelemental Scam.
The problem is the Skelemental sacrifice trigger happens at every end step. So even if I did it in response to the trigger on my end step, it just dies on my opponent's turn.
Scamamentals.
I was just thinking, isn't it a shame that none of the Evoke Elementals cost 3 or less, so you can use Unearth on them? But there is one. You can bring Endurance back if you want. You can have that one.
Yeah, that's true. And I guess Skelemental pitches to both Elementals.
Yeah.
Well, this was fun.
Yeah, it's nice to have Shane back.
Agreed.
It's nice to be back. You don't know what you got till it's gone, till you take 2 weeks off.
Shane, feel better. Hope you recover from COVID soon.
I'm feeling a lot better today, so I'm happy.
Dave, keep up the good work. Always a rock. And Stan, just keep on keeping on, I guess.
Stan, there's a good review coming for you this year. I've seen your file.
Nice.
It's looking good.
And on that note, that wraps up this week's show. If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to our podcast so you get the latest episodes as soon as they come out. And if you use Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating and review. If you'd like to submit a question to our podcast or just reach out in general, you can tweet us at The Dive Down, all one word, or email thedivedown@gmail.com. If you'd like to support our show, you can find our Patreon over at patreon.com/thedivedown. You can also support us while playing Magic Online with the Mana Trader subscription. Promo code TheDiveDown15 gets you 10% off your first 2 months of renting Magic Online cards. And get some amazing shaving soaps, body soaps, fragrances, and more. They now have t-shirts, hats, and decals over at Barrister & Man. Promo code TheDiveDown15 gets you 15% off your first order with them. And save some money on paper cards over at Nerd Rage Gaming with code DIVE8 to get 8% off your order from NRG just in time for the tournament in Newark, Ohio. As always, special thanks to the bands Nowhere and Spaceblood for letting us use their music. And until next week, get out there and scam it up. Oh, are you still there? Why are you still listening? Well, since you're here and you've gone to all this trouble, we've got a surprise. We're doing a little extra giveaway this month, and you can get some really sweet stuff from Stan's closet of magic curiosities that he's trying to unload. We got some Beetle and Grimm stuff, a couple other gifts that I'm just going to mail out for free, patrons, non-patrons alike. All you got to do is message us on Twitter at The Dive Down, get into our DMs. If you're a patron, DM Stan in the Discord. And if you want to get an extra special something or other, and you want to maybe bump the line, make a charitable donation in the Dive Down's name. Could be $5, $10, $15. Show us proof in a screenshot, and we'll make sure you get something extra cool. Do something good for others, and you'll get a little special present for yourself too. And if you can't afford that, that's all right. We'll still try to send you a nice little present while supplies last.
While supplies last.
While supplies last. Supplies are limited, only available to people in the United States. I'm sorry, we can't ship these to Canada, Mexico,
Netherlands,
Asia, Europe, Africa. This is just for Americans. While supplies last, get at us.